What's up guys, Zombie Possum here, and welcome to my first commentary video. Today we're going to go over how I made one of my earlier and more simpler pieces called Desert Oasis. This is actually one of, if not the most popular video on my channel, was the creation of this piece. So I decided to choose this one both for its simplicity but also for its popularity as my first commentary video. I'd like to do more of these in the future, so if you would, click that follow button, click that subscribe button rather. This is YouTube, right? Click the like button, click the notification bell. Do things that let me know that you like what you see if you want to see more of this content. So I won't waste any more of your time with an intro. Let's get right into the content. Alright, so first off we're going to grab a new plane, so Shift A to add, mesh and then plane, and we're going to scale this 4 times. And so that's S for scale and then the number 4 for 4 times. And this is going to serve as our base for our scene. So we're going to tab to go into edit mode and we're going to extrude that on the Z. I'm just going to extrude it up a little bit, and that should give us a decent amount of height. Now, as you can see, our top face is already selected, but if it's not, you can go into face mode by hitting 3 on the keyboard, not the number pad. So 1 takes you in vertex mode, 2 into line or edge mode, and 3 into face mode. So as you can see, our face is already selected, and we can hit Control F and Control E and hit subdivide, and we're going to do that a couple of different times. We're going to subdivide and maybe one more time. Alright, now you can do a couple of things here. You can leave it like this, and that will create one type of look in terms of how your low poly scene is going to look, or you can hit Control T, which is for triangulate. And that basically converts all of your quads into tris. And that creates a different look. And it's entirely up to you how you want to do that. There are definitely situations where you want to do one or the other, but for this, it's entirely up to you. I'm going to leave them as quads for now. Now, right now we have the entire top section or faces that we've now subdivided selected. And if we hit Control and then the minus key on our number pad, we select we move our selection in by 1, and you can look and you can hit Control plus and it expands your selection by faces, or Control minus, it contracts your selection by faces. And just in case we want to select these again, I'm going to go ahead and go over and add a vertex group, and you can do that by going over here to object data and select that. It's this little green triangle here, and then click the plus here next to vertex groups, and we'll call this top. I don't know, you can call it whatever you want, whatever makes sense. Once you've renamed it, or if you're going to rename it, you can hit assign, and that assigns all of the vertex in that to that vertex group. And if we hit Alt A to deselect all, and then hit select over here, you can see it selects those again. So that lets us know that we've set the vertexes that we want into that vertex group. And that also displays the value of a vertex group. There's a lot of values of vertex group, but what we're looking for here is a way to get back to this selection if we want to, so we can deselect or select that vertex group anytime we like. Alright, so I'm going to hit select and then hit Control I to select the inverse, and I'm going to hit H to hide it. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to be able to modify these vertexes without impacting the edges of our scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create our lake, or a pond, if you will, this Oasis pond. So I'm going to switch over to vertex mode by hitting the 1 key on the keyboard. I'm going to select the center vertex, and if we hit G to move, that grabs and moves. And if we hit G and then we hit Z, that moves it in the Z axis, but it's just moving that one vertex. So I'm going to hit escape to cancel out of that, and I'm going to hit Actually, I'm going to show you where the option is up here. Up here you can say proportional editing. Now there's a shortcut key for this, it's O. And so when you hit O or you select that, you can see that this turns blue up here. So you can turn it on or off. And now when it's on, if we were to hit G now, you can see, well, you can't see because, there we go. So now you can see the circle of influence, right? And you can see me moving things around, and if I change the circle of influence, I influence less vertexes, right? And I can grow it out and influence everything. So what I want to do is hit G and Z, and I'm just going to pull these down, right? And that's going to create us our kind of our center Oasis. And if you want to, you can play around with maybe making this a less uniform shape, so we can, you know, change this. So now you can see it's kind of oblong, right? And that's created our Oasis lake or pond. All right. Now what we're going to do is we're going to continue to use proportional editing. Sorry, my brain went blank there for a moment. So we're going to continue to use proportional editing, but we're going to change the setting here, the fall off. Now, the default setting is smooth, which, as you saw in my initial tweaking of the vertexes here, was pretty smooth. It was almost like a ball was sitting on the plane. But what we want to do is we want to change it to random, all right? And that gives us another interesting effect. So let's grab this vertex over here and let's hit G and Z. Again, we want to move it in the Z axis, but we're going to expand our proportional effect zone to be much larger. And we'll grab one over here, and you can see as I move this around, it's creating like almost like a Perlin noise style changing to the terrain there. You see how that's pretty randomized there? And you can change, if you want, you can make that pretty dramatic, but we don't want to do that. We were looking for just some subtle changes in the terrain. Alright, so if we hit Alt-H to unhide what we've selected, we can now see that we now have a much more believable or much more realistic terrain. It's still pretty blah. So why don't we do this? We're going to go back and we're going to say hide again. Oops. Let's go over here and say select to our, deselect all the things. Control A to deselect. And then let's hit select, and that selects that vertex group we selected earlier. And we're going to hit Control I to invert our selection and hide it again. And what I want to do is I want to create something a little more dramatic to our environment. And I'm going to switch this back to smooth for our proportional editing. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a small hill over here. So we're going to hit Control Z. And we're going to move this in. Yeah, there we go. And so what that creates is a hill in the terrain there. And we're going to do another one maybe right here. We can say Control Z, move it up a little. All right, there we go. Now, what I haven't done, and I want to explain to you, let's hit Alt-H and tab out of edit mode. So now we're in object mode. We can kind of see our terrain a little bit. What I want to do is show you an add-on that I use that I like a lot. And I got this from a guy who's a great YouTuber, Polygon Runway. He didn't create this, but he definitely recommended it. He makes some fantastic isometric art. Certainly, you'll see a lot of similarities between our work because I learned so much from him. But if you hit N and you've installed this IsoCam add-on, and I'll include a link to the add-on in the description of this video, you can choose a number of different IsoCam options here, and I don't honestly know the differences between them. True IsoCam, I do know, fits the technical definition of an isometric camera, But game isocam has some differences that I'm not aware of. I presume that there are differences because they're different selections, but I don't know what the differences are. But I do like to use the game isocam. So I'm going to select game isocam, and it's going to add us an isometric camera to the scene. Now, because this outline is orange, this is telling you know that in Blender you have selected, the camera is selected right now. So if I hit G and I move, I'm actually moving the camera. So I'm going to hit G and Z to move in the Z axis to kind of scroll up. And I like to create my videos at a 4:3, so 1600 by 1200 resolution. It's a good resolution to work with. And since we're going to have some palm trees in this scene that are tallish, we want our ground plane to be towards the lower half of the image. So we're gonna go ahead and change that to look that. And the reason we added the camera at this point, or we add the camera, is so that we can periodically switch to the camera view and kind of get an idea what our scene's going to look like. So we added those hills, and I wanted to make sure that neither of those hills would obscure my view of the Oasis water, right? So while we're thinking about the water, let's hit middle mouse to scroll, or to roll our scene view. And because we haven't moved our cursor, we can hit Shift A and add another plane. And this is going to be our water plane. So we'll go ahead and scale this, and we're going to scale it slightly less than we did the ground plane, because we want this to be the water, and we certainly don't want to extend beyond the ground plane. So we're going to hit 3. And we'll scroll. Oops. Let's hit G and Z. I guess I didn't click to commit that change. So let's hit Scale and 3 again. S and 3, and now click to commit that. Now hit G and Z to move this. Well, I guess it's not selected. All right, G and Z, and we'll move this in the Z axis, and we want it to be high enough that we can see it, but not so high that it exceeds the boundaries of our little pond we've created. All right, and now we're going to hit Tab to go into edit mode, and much like we did the terrain of the ground, we're going to hit Ctrl E and subdivide, and we're going to do this a few times. And what we're looking for here is enough topology to create the surface of a water. If it was just flat, surface of a Oasis pond or lake, if it was just flat, it would just be it would like be a glassy surface, and that doesn't really speak water. At least in certain situations, it doesn't. And really, in this situation, if you think about an oasis in the desert, it's probably pretty still water. There's not a whole lot going on in the desert, but we want to create some interesting reflections. So we're gonna grab this central vert, and we're gonna hit. Actually, we're gonna go switch back to random as our styling of proportional editing. We hit G and Z again, much like we did with the terrain, and we're just going to pull up a little bit. We don't want to create a ton of turbulence in the water, but we want enough that when we go to texture this water, that it's giving us a little bit of interesting reflections, right? So we've created our land and we've created our water. Pretty straightforward. So now the original scene had not a ton of items in it. So it had the ground, it had the water, but then it had some palm trees, and it had some cactuses, and it had some rocks. And there was also some kind of motes of light that I thought was an interesting add after the fact. Kind of gave it a little bit more fantasy feel, and we'll play with those as well. But right now we've got our ground and we've got our water, and so now I think we'll move into the cactuses, which are one of the more interesting, at least as an artist and as a kind of Blender newbie, as I certainly was and honestly still am. During the creation of this art, I was really pleased with how the cactuses showed up and how they turned out. while we're adding them, we'll also play with some new add-ons, because add-ons are awesome, and they're one of the exciting features of Blender that I think really make it shine above some of the other packages that are available out there. Alright, so let's put a cactus here. So we'll hit, I'm hitting shift and right click to place our cursor in a particular location. So you can shift right click anywhere you like, and it'll put the cursor on the surface you're clicking on. And then I'm going to hit shift middle click, alt middle click. There we go, alt middle click. Sorry, I'm still learning here, same as you. So alt middle click centers your camera on the selection. It's pretty handy if you are, especially if you're working in really tight, because a lot of times your rotation or your zoom will get, I don't know what causes it, but it gets kind of wonky where like you're zooming in and you're zooming with your scroll mouse like really aggressively, and you're moving like half an inch. I'm not sure what causes that, but I've found that if I alt middle click in a location I want to rotate around or zoom in on, I can now zoom back in normally. So we're going to hit shift A. We're going to add a circle. And very frequently when you're in Blender and you do any sort of action that creates an item, and frequently when you're using a tool as well, you'll get this little indicator down here in the lower left hand corner that sometimes will show up like this, where it's full screen or maximized, or sometimes it'll show up minimized like this. But what this does, gives you an opportunity to change some settings with the most recent action you've done. And so 32 is way too many faces for our circle. Let's try 16. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, I can see the faces pretty good, but honestly I think that's probably still a little bit too face heavy, because once we scale this down, those faces are going to be pretty small. So we're going to go with 12, and that feels good. We'll go with it for now. We'll see what that looks like. So I'm going to switch over to wireframe mode. You can switch into different modes with these buttons up here at the top. So there's wireframe mode here. Then there is viewport shading solid mode. Then there is it's textured mode. So if we had textures on this, it would show up here. And then lastly, there's rendered mode, and depending on our render settings, we'll see something different here. But we're going to go to wireframe mode. And you can switch between your modes by hitting the Z key, and we can go. We get this little pop up here that is driven by our mouse direction. So we can say solid, wireframe, rendered, or material preview. And we're looking for wireframe. All right, so wireframe gives us a much better view of what's going on here. So let's scale this down. We're trying to create if we hit our camera button here, we can kind of see about how big that's going to be, and that looks pretty good. So let's zoom in on that. One thing you can do, which I think is really handy, is you can hit the full stop, period, whatever key you want to call it, on the keypad, and that will focus in on whatever you have selected. And it frequently brings me in much closer than I want to be, but what it does is it focuses in on that thing. So it makes it easier than trying to scroll your mouse around and find the thing that you have in focus. You can just hit that full stop and it brings you right in. All right, so again, as I said, I think that's a good size. So we're going to hit tab and go into edit mode. And I'm going to hit the F key right away, and that's going to fill, F for fill. That's going to fill in that circle with faces, or with, in this case, a face. And out of good habit, this is a big N-gon, and there's probably nothing wrong. In fact, I know there's nothing wrong with this N-gon existing, because it's actually going to be below the surface of our thing. But out of habit, I always inset these, and this is just a good idea to get in the habit of doing, because it helps you if you ever get into hard surface modeling. And I won't go into that in this video. Maybe we'll get into that in another video. But it's good for if you're using hard surface modeling with a bevel modifier on your objects. That's really necessary to do that inset. So just a good habit to get into. But again, we're not concerned with that right now. What we're trying to do is create a cactus. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and I like to go into the camera view and view this because we can kind of see how we want this to look. So we're going to hit E and then Z, and we're extracting in the Z is all that means. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to as tall as I want this cactus to be. And that feels pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and fill that in again. And just glancing that, the whole thing looks a little bigger than I'd like it to be. It's about the right height, but it's just a little thicker than I want it to be. So I'm going to hit A to select all, and then I'm going to hit S to scale. And I see right there my proportional editing is still on. So I'm going to hit O to turn that off, and then hit S again to scale. And I'm going to hit Shift Z. And what that says is I only want to scale in the X and the Y axis. So anytime you do a scale or a move or a rotate, you can hit Shift in X, Y, or Z and indicate to Blender that you do not want to move, rotate, or scale in that axis. So I hit Shift Z, and that means it'll only scale on the X and the Y. It's not going to get any shorter, which is good because I like the height. I just think it's a little thick. So, alright, so we scaled it down, and I'm going to click to deselect all, and I'm going to switch into edge mode, and I want to select this top ring, and I could go around and click each individual edge, but that's tedious. What I'd rather do is select an edge loop, and to select an edge loop, I can click Alt and click on the edge itself, and that selects the entire edge loop. And you can do that anywhere, and if your topology is good, you will be able to select the edge loop that you want. Alright, so we're concerned with this top edge loop, and I want to do, did we fill this in? I want to see, did we? Yes, because we extruded a filled edge, looks like that has a face there, and you can actually check that by hitting the 3 key. And you can see this little dot in the center, and this might be hard to see for you on here. I'll zoom in a little bit. It really didn't make it any easier, but there's a little dot here, and that indicates a face. And you can see the dots down below. Maybe I'll deselect it. Oh yeah, there you can see it. So that tells us there's a face there. But we're concerned with the edges, because what we're going to do is bevel the edges. And to bevel those edges, you hit Control B, and then as we move our mouse away from the center of our bevel, that bevel becomes more and more intense. Alright, now as you can see, our bevel is only one face or 2 edges, but if we scroll our wheel while we're in this bevel mode, we can actually increase the number of edges in our bevel. Now because we're doing this in kind of a low poly mode, I don't think we want to add more faces than what we've added here with the 1 scroll up, so now we have 3 edges. That feels pretty good, so we're going to go with that. Alright, so now we've clicked and committed that bevel. And that feels pretty good. But, you know, a cactus has, the traditional cartoony cactus has little arms that come off of it, and, little mini cactuses that grow out the side. So in order to create those, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control R. Well, I'm still in edit mode, right? This is object mode, this is edit mode. And you can tell this, a good way to tell what mode you're in, obviously is to check here where it says edit mode. If I hit tab, I go to object mode, hit tab again, go into edit mode. But often I just glance up at these menu options here. If I'm in object mode, there's only a handful of options. See, there's only these options. But if I hit tab and hit edit mode, I've got a ton of options up there. And that's frequently a good indicator of what mode I'm in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Control R while I'm in edit mode, and that creates an edge loop, right? And you can scroll your wheel to add additional edge loops, as many as you like, whatever makes sense. But in this case, I'm just going to add one, and I'm going to add one again right after that. But what I want to do is set this to a specific location. So let's put one right here, and let's grab and add a second one. Alright, and let's put it like right here. And what this represents is the level where we want one of the arms to come out of, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to scroll around this. I'm going to hit the full stop key again to kind of center my view on this edge loop. And what I want to do is I want to select just maybe 3 faces here. So let's go 1, 2, 3 faces. And I'm going to do something. I'm going to use something called the Loop Tools add-on. And real quickly, let me show you how you add add-ons or enable add-ons in Blender. So you go up to Edit and then Preferences. And then you can see I already have add-ons selected here, but it's select add-ons on the left-hand side. And then you can simply search for the add-on you're looking for. So we're looking for Loop Tools. And if I did not have it enabled, there would be no checkbox there, and you could check that. And that would enable Loop Tools. And earlier we did the ISOCAM add-on. And you can see I have ISOCAM enabled. ISOCAM is not one of the default add-ons with Blender, but Loop Tools is. So if you own, or if you've downloaded Blender 2.83, 2.82, I don't know how far back it goes, but I think it goes back pretty far, Loop Tools is part of Blender. So that's how you enable it. So now that it is enabled, we can hit F3, and I think it's loop, no, I think it's circle, if I could type. How does it work? Is it Control E? No. Is it Control F? I don't think it's Control F. Oh, I think they moved it actually. I think the menu's gone. If you go under Edit, Loop Tools, yeah, here we go. Loop Tools is one of the options. So what we're looking to do is basically make these selected vertexes, so if we hit 1 to go into vertexes, into a circle. So let's see if we can do this. Let's hit circle. Yeah, that's basically what we're looking for. So what that does is takes the vertexes that you have selected and just circularizes them, right? So I wonder what the best play here is. I think I'm going to delete these faces. So the way you do that is you select the things you want to delete, and you hit the X key. And that's your shortcut key to delete things. And we have the option to delete the vertexes, the edges, or the faces. And you can also dissolve vertexes, edges, and faces. And what those do is they try to dissolve or remove the vertexes, edges, or faces without creating a hole. So if I were to, let's actually play with that. So if I do dissolve vertexes, you'll see that what it did was it removed those vertexes, but it's hard to see, but there's actually a mouse-shaped face there. I've now got one face selected, and you can see that it's got some wonky things going on. I'm going to Control Z to undo that and undo that. And then you can also hit X and dissolve edges, virtually the same effect from the looks of things. And then lastly, dissolve faces. And dissolve faces actually removes the faces that we have selected and creates one N-gon to represent it. And that actually might not be too far off from what we want. Let's try to work with that. So just kind of playing with the angle here. I'm going to scale this down just a hair, because I do want this to be smaller than our cactus. And you can see that in collapsing that geometry, we've lost a little width at the point it is. So I'm going to actually hit G. I'm just going to drag it out just a hair so that we just don't feel like we've lost that. All right. All right. But again, I'm turning my camera perpendicular to that face, because what I want to do is I want to hit E and extrude out. Right, and I'm going to hit G to move this up, and I'm going to hit R to rotate it a bit. And you can kind of see that while it rotated, the faces that extend up to the face we have selected kind of get stretched a little bit, and it's making it look like it's actually growing in size. We want actually quite the opposite to happen. We want it to look like it's getting smaller as it goes out. So we're going to hit S to shrink it down and extrude it again. And we'll rotate this and maybe move it this and scale it. And again, extrude it, rotate it. And what we can do here, actually, since we want to kind of be headed straight up, we can hit scale, S for scale, Z for the axis that we want to zero out our face on, and then hit 0. And it actually will, it'll actually, whoops, hit escape. S, Z, and 0, and then we're going to left click to commit that, and you can see it's now it's 100% perpendicular to our z-axis. Now it's a little small, so we're going to scale it out a little bit, and then we're going to hit E to scale it straight up. And maybe we don't want it to be straight up, so we'll scale it, or we'll grab it, move it over a little bit, and scale it down. And we'll E and scale it up just a little bit more, or extrude it up rather, and scale it down. And then I would like to bevel that top edge again, so we're going to hit Control B and bevel it much like we did the top of the cactus. Alright, so there we've got a pretty good start at a cactus. But you know what? I would like this guy to be a little bit more exciting than he is. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit Control R down below here, and we're going to create another edge loop. And we'll move it up just like we did on the other, and completely opposite of our other arm, we're going to grab these three faces much like we did before. We're going to go up to edit under our, and real quickly, I don't know if I've talked about this, but you hit N. N hides and shows this panel over here, and this is a lot of handy information over here. This has your item parameters, so this gives you some I'm not sure what this median is. I'm not gonna be honest with you, or not gonna lie to you rather. It's the local median and the global median. I don't think that's our location, although it says transform. Maybe it is. I don't mess with this too much. Transform I usually just move in the panels. But what you do have here that's pretty handy, actually, you know what that is? That's because we're in edit mode. Let's tab out of edit mode so we can see this. Location, that's what I was expecting to see. So location is our location in the X, Y, and Z grid. Our rotation is, as you can see, we can rotate on all three axes. And then we have scale, and you can see we're now at, because we scaled down at the very beginning of the creation of this circle, we're at a roughly 2.86 or 28.6% of our kind of our full scale, and we can commit that scale by hitting Control A, and we can commit our scale. And what that does is that sets our current scale to 1, and that uniform scale is important to a lot of your modifiers. And changing a lot of interesting features in the game, such as rotation. When you rotate an item, if its scale is not uniform, you'll see different behavior. We just did a bevel. If you bevel an edge on an item that doesn't have uniform scale, you can often see it bevels in a way that's unexpected. So anytime you're seeing things behave in a way that you don't expect, you might want to check your rotation and your scale, and you can again hit N and go to the item tab. There's some other things here. The active tool, whatever you have selected over here, if there's any configuration items for that over here, that'll be shown here. You can change your view. Some important things here. Focal length is just for your view. It doesn't affect how your render looks, but it is handy if you want a wider view or not. Your clip start is something that I use a lot. It's 0.1 meters by default, but I frequently turn it all the way down, because if you want to get tight with some detail, a lot of times you'll get clipping in your view that is frustrating. So 3D cursor, you can see our cursor, we moved it, right? So it's a little off of center. If we hit Shift S, we can say cursor to world origin, and if you watch our cursor location here, if you cursor to world origin, it is now 0, 0, 0, and you can see that it's now back at center. So if we hit Shift left click, or no, Shift right click, you can see that our cursor has been moved. The cursor I used to find extremely frustrating. When I first started Blender, I was like, what value does this thing have? Now I use it all the time, because it's really where anything you create into the scene is going to be created. And later on, when you want to play with your pivot points and your rotation, you can change that to 3D cursor and do some interesting things with using your 3D cursor as your pivot point. So anyway, moving back to our scene here, we can see our cactus is coming right along. So let's select that again and hit tab, and we're back to these three faces that we selected earlier. So if we go back to edit and hit circle, it creates that circle that we saw earlier. And much like earlier, we want to scale that down a bit, And if we come around to the side, we will see that we again lost a little width to our geometry, so we're going to grab that and move it out. But much like we did earlier, we're going to move E to extrude. We'll rotate that, scale it down a bit. I'm going to rotate that a bit more. Hit E to extrude, rotate that, scale it in as well. We'll move it up and over. And E to extrude one more time. We'll rotate that, and again, like I did earlier, we'll hit S at Z and 0 to make it in the Z axis. We'll make it flat or perpendicular to the Z axis. So, and we'll scale that up a little bit, and this one we'll make a little smaller. We'll scale it down, and finally Control B to bevel that top edge. Alright, and you can see that for some reason our scaling did not scale the way we wanted to, or the way I expected it to. So let's hit Control Z. We've got a stack of undos here, so I'd like to see what caused that. So we were at this point here, and we rotated it just like that, maybe just like that. And then I said scale Z and 0, but I don't think that's exactly how that went down. If I hit Control Z, I think I was more like this, and I hit scale Z and 0. And as you can see, when I did that, it squashed it on one of the other axes, not what we were looking for. So let's hit Control Z, and let's rotate that pretty close to flat. Kind of move it where we want it, and then we'll say scale Z and 0, and I suspect it's pretty close to where we're looking for, and it is. Just got a little bit of drift there, so we'll scale this in. I'd like to move it just a little closer and scale it a little bit further in, and we'll hit extrude up, scale, and finally extrude up just a hair more, scale it in, and bevel. Created some interesting. In fact, we're going to delete these faces. If you'll remember, what we did earlier is we dissolved the faces. So let's do that again. Let's dissolve faces. And remember, dissolving the faces just takes all the faces you've selected and tries to create one uniform face of all the connected polys. So really the same as deleting the face and recreating it. So we'll bevel that. All right, so we have our cactus. I mean, that's pretty much what we're looking for as far as the cactus goes. We could play with it. You could select, well, that selected more. Oh, that selected more than I wanted, because if I want to create some more interesting geometry, I need to have the geometry to do it. So I could select like this, all right, and I could move it over a bit, and I could select everything else and move it the other way. Oh, you know what's happening though? You see what's happening? It's not selecting everything, right? So we can Control Z a couple times and undo that. And there's a feature here. There's a couple of different ways to solve this problem. When you want to select the entire geometry, but you're not able to select what's on the other side, a couple of things you can do. One, you can go into Wireframe, which gives us the ability to grab everything, right? But another option is, if we were in solid mode, you can hit Alt-Z, and that changes your entire geometry to a kind of an X-ray mode. And when you're in solid mode, but X-ray mode is enabled, you can select everything. And we see now that we've moved things around a little bit. We've created a different little bit of a look here, trying unsuccessfully to grab basically that. Really would like to grab that. Yeah, it's a little tricky there with the geometry. Looks pretty good though. I don't mind it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the very bottom. I'm going to scale it out just a little bit to give it a little bit of kind of solidify the trunk there. And I'm going to move this down. Hit G and Z to move it down in the terrain so that it eclipses terrain. So I'm going to hit Alt Z to come out of X-ray mode, and there is our cactus. Right on. So we're going to want a couple of cactuses, but what we want to do is go ahead and add our prickles, our thorns to this video, or to this cactus before we move on. Now, the way we're going to do that is we're going to actually add a hair simulation particle system to this. And the way that particle systems work when applied to objects is they work off the vertexes or the faces. So what you want to do is make sure you have a fairly uniform layout in terms of vertexes and faces. And as we can see, there's at least one gap here that we don't have a uniform layout of faces, and that's this one here. So we're going to hit Ctrl R and go ahead and just left click to commit that, and that gives us a little bit more uniform layout of faces along the central trunk, and the arms have pretty good face distribution already, so we don't need to do much there. So the way we're going to do this is first we need to create the object that we're going to use to present as hair or thorns. So we're going to tab into object mode, and we can really do this anywhere, but I'm going to hit Shift A and I'm going to add a cube, and then I'm going to hit the slash key on the number pad to isolate that object that we just created. All right, and we're going to jump right into edit mode, and what I want to do is go ahead and select this face on top. So we're going to hit 3 to go into face mode, and then we're going to select that face, and then what I'm going to do is hit M to merge. And what merge does is merges the vertices, and so the vertices of the face that I've selected is 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to hit merge, and we're going to hit at center, and what that does is creates a nice little pyramid there. All right. And then we'll go ahead and select this face down below, and we'll just scale it down. And this is our very simple thorn, right? Let's go ahead and name it in the hierarchy view here. Let's call it Thorn, and not Thorn. And what we might want to do is go ahead and move it into a collection that we can easily hide. So we can hit. Is it Alt M? Yes. No. We're in edit mode. Won't do anything. Maybe it's over here. 2.83 has got me confused on a few things. So it used to be you could hit M in this screen, and it would effectively do what hitting M while in the hierarchy view does. So if we're in the hierarchy view, we hit M. It says we can move to collection, scene collection, which is the root collection, collection, which is the collection that's always created at the beginning of any new scene, or we can say new collection. We're going to say new collection, and we'll say. I always call this one booleans and brushes. It doesn't actually apply to this particular object because it's really more of a particle, but we'll hit OK. And basically what I'm saying is this collection I don't want to be able to see in render or see in the viewport. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up here to our filters here, and we're going to enable this and this, and those two things are important. One says visible in viewport, so we can disable that, and it's gone from viewport. And we can say disable here, we can say disable in renders. But what I just did it on the Thorn, but what we really want to do is on the collection. So we're going to disable, disable, disable. So now that anything that's moved in this collection will not be visible in the viewport or the render. So if we hit our slash again on the number pad, it brings us back to where we were, and we can select our cactus. Let's focus in on that. And if we go over here, there is a icon or a tab here. Looks kind of like an object that's expelling some other objects. That's way I like to think of it. And this is our particle properties. And currently we don't have any particle system, so I'm going to hit add, and we'll call this Thorns. You just double click on it to rename it. And I don't know why renaming it here and renaming it here doesn't do the same thing. On textures and other settings in Blender, renaming it up there renames it down below. There's probably a good reason it does, but I don't know what it is. Now what we're not looking for is an emitter. Emitters, particle emitters, they throw particles. They emit particles. But what we're really concerned with here is a hair particle system. Now we're not trying to grow hair on our cactus. What we're saying is we want to project an object on the face of our object in some fashion. Now hair is much the same way. We're projecting hair on our object, but we want to project thorns. So what we're going to do is we're going to say hair, and we're also going to say advanced. And you'll have to bear with me because I don't get into these very often, and I tend to have to kind of stumble around here. So hair dynamics we don't need. Velocity we don't need for thorns because thorns don't really bend to the wind. We probably will play with rotation, but let's don't turn that on yet. Physics, again, unlikely that we have to worry about that because these are thorns. They're pretty rigid and firm. They're not going anywhere. So render, you can render things as a path, so kind of define where and how the hair would be presented. Again, not useful to us. Viewport display we can play with, but again, probably not important. Don't know what children does, gonna be honest with you. Simple and interpolated, never been a concern of mine, but probably a handy feature. Hair shape doesn't play into what we're doing. So if we go down to, where am I? What am I missing? Ah, yeah. So the source is determining where the hairs, or in this case thorns, are going to emit from. We're currently set to faces. Probably not a bad place to be. Now, if we look down here, trying to find where we define, is it under hair dynamics? No. I don't think so. No, we don't need hair dynamics. I'm trying to define where we, or find where we define how our hair is, for lack of a better word, defined. Give me just a moment. Oh, here we go. Render as path. We want to render as object. And it's going to say, well, what object do you want to render as? And we're going to hit this little like pip thing, and we're going to select the thorn. And as you can see, we now have thorns, but they're all kinds of jacked up. So we're going to play with some things here. I like to go in here and turn on rotation. And if we go into our thorn, if we look at our thorn, its rotation is 0. So its rotation should be fine. So we should be able to turn on rotation and then change the orientation axis. And let's just fiddle with it and see what we get. So normal seems to point everything up, which is interesting. It tells me that our rotation axis is not set right, because normal, in my opinion, normal should point away from the face, directly perpendicular to the face. That's what the normals do. Normal tangent, not sure what that does. Velocity, we're not using. And then you can also say global X, global Y, global Z, and you can say object X, object Y, and object Z. And remember the object, if you've not played with this, the object orientation is different from the global orientation. So basically, if the object is rotated in any way, if it's not 0, 0, 0, then the object orientation doesn't match the global orientation in terms of rotation. So the phase just determines how it's rotated. But you know what? I see what one of our problems is that our origin of our thorn. Let's select our thorn again, and I need to turn it on to be visible, and I'm going to isolate it again. I'm in theory going to isolate it. I really like to isolate. There we go. So we hit tab to go into edit mode. You can see our origin is right in the center, but we really want our origin to be at the bottom. We want our origin to be the base of the thorn. So with the bottom face selected, I'm going to hit Shift S. I'm going to say cursor to selected. And you can see our cursor is now down at the bottom. Then I'm going to tab out of edit mode into object mode. I'm going to go over here to the object menu. I'm going to say set origin to 3D cursor. And you watch as I click this, our orange dot will move to the bottom. And there it is. It's down there with our cursor. And to prove that, we'll hit Shift S, cursor to world origin. cursor is gone now. It's moved to our world origin, and our dot for our origin for our object is still showing down there at the bottom. So now if we hit our tab key or our slash key to unisolate our thorn, and then we select our cactus again, and we go down here to rotation and we monkey with our phase, we can see that our rotation is now based on the center or the bottom of that thorn, which is what we want, right? Alright, so there's a few different things we want to play with here. Size is one of those things, and I'll have to find it here in our... Oh yeah, so here's our length and our segment. Let's decrease our number down to something more reasonable, although it's still pretty high. Alright, so the emission number is now set to 150, which is probably too low. We're probably going to want our 159. Let's go to 200. And then our seed, which really doesn't matter, it's a randomized value. If you don't like what you see, you can tweak that to see if you can get something more akin to what you like. But you know, the particles per face, you can increase that, but it will still never increase beyond our 200. So if we wanted more faces, more thorns, we'd still have to increase that, and then we can play with particles per face to get the distribution we're looking for, right? Now there is a scale. I'll have to find it here. The velocity, can't imagine it is. Quality steps, collision structure, volume. They've changed some things here in the latest version of Blender, and oh yeah, it's literally right in front of me. Scale. Alright, so scale is set to 0.5, which is actually far lower. What you can do is you can set this to 1, which would make them huge, and then set your scale randomness to something higher. Now even if you set to 1, you might get results that you don't want, so you can scale it back down to get something a little bit more reasonable. So let's hold shift while we drag. If you don't know the shift, holding shift while you adjust a number or anything really in Blender causes it to adjust at a slower rate. So again, let's go back to rotation. Let's randomize our phase, and let's see if we can get our phase to behave here. It's still not exactly what we're looking for. I think our orientation axis is still wonky. Let's try normal tangent. What we're looking for here is let's crank down our randomization. We want it randomized, but we don't want it super randomized, because what we want is something we want all of our thorns to originate from the body of the... Yeah, we're not getting what we want here, so let's try something here. Let's go back over to our thorn and let's take a look at its rotation. It's not rotated, and its scale is 1. Why are we not getting what we want here? Story of my life, right? So, it's going to be a problem in rotation. Let's see what we can monkey with here. I feel like normal is what we want. So let's crank the phase. Let's set the phase to 0. Randomize phase. But what we're looking for, so see how we have like this thorn here? Like, see this guy here? I can't select him because he's a particle, but this guy here, he's not pointed anywhere near away from the cactus. He's pointed like down into the side. We really want him to point away from the cactus body. Kind of, you know, you really want all of these thorns to effectively point away from the center mass of the cactus, and we're not quite getting that. So let's play with it a little bit more. So let's turn off randomization. and let's turn off randomization of the phase, and see everything's pointing up. So what you can do is you can actually select the object and hit R to rotate, and literally nothing happens. Okay, let's hit into edit mode. There we go. Alright, so alright. And so let's hit 7 to go from the top, and let's rotate this way. There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. So now you can see, and what I've done is I've simply rotated the geometry, not the object itself, but the geometry inside of the object. So what basically I've gone into edit mode and rotated the object. So now we can see that we're kind of getting something more akin to what we're looking for. So let's click on the cactus again in object mode. And I think our rotation is fine. We can randomize it a bit, just a hair though. We don't want to randomize it a ton. We'll randomize the phase a little. But what we are seeing is kind of an inconsistent scale. So let's go down here to the scale. Let's crank the randomization of the scale down, and that's going to cause a lot of the thorns to grow in size, so then we can then scale down the thorns themselves. And now we're getting somewhere. This is looking pretty good. In fact, if we go to our camera view and we zoom out a little bit, that is the cactus we're looking for. That took a little bit longer than we expected, but I'm glad we stuck with it and got what we were looking for. This is a new version of Blender, and I haven't done that particular thing in a minute, so yeah, it turned out okay. So let's click on this guy and let's rename it to Cactus, and we're just going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and we now have a second cactus. And we can hit Shift Z while we're moving it around here, and what we're saying is I only want to move it in the X and the Y, and I don't want to move it in the Z. I want it to move only, you know, along the X and Y axis. We're going to move it over here, and we can now hit the period key and zoom in on it, and we can see that it's below the surface, and we're getting the effect we want. So next thing we want to do is create a couple of palm trees, and we're going to try to crank through those real quickly because I don't want this video to last forever. But that's what we have coming up next. So to get those palm trees started, what we're going to do is pretty similar to what we did with the cactuses. So let's Shift left click, excuse me, and we'll add Shift A to add, go to Mesh and Circle, and it's still set to 12, and I think that worked okay with the cactuses, so let's stick with that. Yeah, I think we can go with that. So we'll shrink this down to something representing what we think the bottom of our palm tree is going to look like in terms of width. All right, and then I'm going to hit G and move that down in the Z a little bit. But it looks like it's extending over the water just a hair, so we don't want that to happen. So let's hit G again and say Shift Z, and we're going to move that like we did earlier in the X and the Y, but not the Z. Now if we go into Wireframe, where we can stay in solid and hit Alt Z to go into X-ray mode and reselect our object, because I clicked off of it, and we tab into edit mode, and now we have a circle that we want to fill in. So we'll hit F to fill, and I'm going to hit I to inset that face. And again, that's just a good habit to be in for you know, if you're later going to do hard surface modeling. So we have our outer edge loop selected. I hit Alt and clicked on the edges there. So if we'll click off of it and I hit Alt and click on that, that selects that edge loop. All right, and then we're going to hit, and I'm going to actually hit 1 on the number pad to go into the side view, or I guess it's the front view. And I'm going to hit E and extrude in the Z. And I'm going to go up pretty high. In fact, let's zoom out a little bit and let's grab this and move it up even a little further. All right, and I want to scale it down because palm trees are tapering trunks typically, right? And we're going to want this thing to kind of lean like a palm tree is wont to do. So what we'll do is we need to add some edge loops. So we're going to still in edit mode, we're going to hit Ctrl R and kind of mouse over the edges that we want to perpendicularly loop. And it sure enough shows that. If we move out, it goes away. If we move it back in, it comes back. And then we can use the wheel to add additional loops. So we're going to add, let's say 6 loops. Yeah, 6 loops feels good. So that's 6 loops. And we'll click, left click to confirm. And now it says, oh, we can move those, but we can just right click and it puts them back in the center where they were. All right, and so now what I want to do is, we're still in, X-ray mode. So I want to box select this top edge loop. And I'm going to hit G and move it. But as you can see, we're only moving that edge loop, which isn't what we want to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up here to proportional editing. And if you'll notice, we're still on random. We don't want random fall off. We want smooth fall off for this particular maneuver. All right, so now when we hit G to move that, you can see that it moves more of the loops. And it's based on that, again, it's based on that area of influence, that circle of influence. And I think I want to grab it and basically influence every edge loop except for the bottom one, just so that's what we've got right there. All right, and then I'm going to move it over, but then once it's in position, I'm going to also rotate it. Right, you can see we're creating that kind of lean that you come to expect out of a palm tree. So we'll move it over a little bit more and maybe rotate it just a hair more. And I'm going to shrink in this and kind of focus my rotation towards the top. All right, I like that. I think that's a pretty good trunk. And we can stick with that. Now, if we tab into object mode, and let's hit Alt Z to go back into solid mode without the X-ray. It's leaning, but it's leaning in a manner that, well, it just happens to be immediately along the X-axis, and that's not what we want. So let's hit R and Z. I'm going to rotate this just a bit, just to give it a feeling of more natural and organic growth. And if we jump over into our camera view, we can kind of see what that's going to look like. Okay, that's pretty good. I don't mind that at all. All right, so we'll left click and move the mouse to roll the view around our object, and that gets us out of the camera view, and then we can hit the period on the number pad to zoom in and focus on our object. All right, so now we need to make the top of it, right? So pretty straightforward. What I did on the original piece of artwork was I hit F to fill, and then I believe I insetted, and then hit G and Y. No, must be G and XX. Nope, G and ZZ. G and ZZ. Oh, G. Z, Z. Okay, well, that's interesting. G, Z, Z. Why is it doing that? Does our object have some rotation? Let's see. It has a little, but let's see. Let's apply our rotation. I don't think that's what our problem is. G, no. Let's turn off O. G and Z, Z. Interesting. We can, well, I was getting local. All right, well, I'm not sure what drives that, but sometimes I have to go up here and actually select local. Well, actually our local is applied to, yeah, even local is following the global axis, which maybe it's because we're in edit mode. Yeah, I'm not really sure. But we can do normal, and if we hit G, Z, and we can move that out into normal, and then we can even hit Control B. So we'll move it out a little bit, and hit Control B, and we'll add an extra edge loop there. It's probably a little more than we wanted, but we'll go with it. All right, so that's kind of the top of our palm tree. And what I did from here is I actually went and grabbed, if we kind of go up above this top, I grabbed every other edge along this edge loop. And I'm going to show you a couple different ways to do that. There's actually a really handy way to do it. So I can go around and then click each one like we just did, which is fine if you've only got, 6 edges to grab. But let's say you had 50 or 100. That could be really troublesome. And you could also do a misclick like I've done here, and I've selected this edge and this edge, and when I went to extrude those edges, something wonky would happen. We don't want any wonkiness in our world. So what we're going to do is we're going to select one edge, then we're going to shift select another edge, and then what we're going to do is we're going to set Control Shift plus. And what it does, what that tells Blender is that try to follow the pattern that I've done in my selection. And sure enough, it says, okay, well, you're moving around this edge loop and you've skipped one, so I'm going to continue to skip one around that edge loop. And sure enough, that got us exactly what we wanted. And if we had hundreds of these to do, we could do that much faster and much more accurately by doing something like that. And there's probably even better ways to do it at that scale, but it kind of gives you an idea on how to do that sort of thing quickly. So again, that was Control Shift plus. And real quickly, we'll talk a little bit about that. So if I select this face and I say Control plus, I'm saying select one more loop of faces around what I've got selected. And if I do it again, it'll grab another loop and another loop and another loop and another loop. And if I hit Control minus on my number pad, it does the opposite, which is handy, right? So the feature that we used to Control Shift plus, well, now it's not working. All right, let's try it again. Control Shift plus. There we go. That feature that we used is just an extension of the normal Control plus and Control minus. All right, so if we go up here and we go back to global and we say individual origins, I think that's what we're going to want. What we're going to do is we're going to hit extrude, and we're going to hit escape, and then we're going to hit scale out, and nothing's going to happen, and that's not what we wanted. All right, so let's try that again. So I'm going to hit Control Z, and let's hit extrude, and let's hit Z. It's not really what we want. So let's undo that again. What did I do? Did we do... You know what we could do is we could select this face in the middle, and we can hit Shift S and move the cursor to selected, and we can set our pivot point to the 3D cursor, and let's see what that gets us. So again, we'll do Shift Select and Control Shift plus all the way around, and now let's hit E and scale those out. There we go. Progress. All right. Now we've got something that resembles the beginnings of our leaves. All right, so I'm going to go perpendicular to the view, and you don't have to be super accurate with this, but what we're going to do is we're just going to move these up so that they're more aligned with, and they're kind of wonky, aren't they? Let's move them over a little. There we go. All right, and we're going to scale them again just a little bit further, and then we're going to hit extrude again, hit escape, and then scale them out some more, and then we're going to turn this back to individual origins, and let's see what this does. Let's scale these in. Yeah, there we go. And now we've got something close to our leaves, right? Now I'm going to switch it back to 3D cursor because I think these could be a little further apart. So let's hit G and S, and that just moves them out some more. And we're going to do the same thing actually with each of these edges. I don't know if this will work. We'll hit scale. Yep, I moved them out. It's awesome. All right, so what I want to do is grab these edges out here, and we're going to move them down to create that kind of droop of the leaves. So let's hit G and just move them down. Alright, so now if we go back over here to camera view, yeah, that's pretty spot on. Now what we are seeing is that the leaves are kind of starbursting out of this, but in reality gravity would pull this one further down, and we'll grab its friend here right? And this one might come further down, right? Same as here. So let's grab this one, move it down a bit, and move this down a bit. Alright, so now when we jump over to this, get a little bit more feel that, that it's kind of an organic creature there, right? Even though it's just a tree, it's still a living thing, right? So, now we're going to want a couple of trees, right? And so what we'll do is grab this guy, Shift D, we got him there. And remember, we can hit Shift Z, and now we're only moving him in the X and Y axes and not in the Z axis. So like if I'm moving back here, it's actually just getting further away rather than going up. It feels like it's going up, but it's because we're in the isometric view. Nothing gets smaller due to perspective in isometric view. So let's put it right here, and then we're going to rotate it on the Z. Nope, we're not going to rotate on the Z because it's got a 3D cursor, and we want maybe median point. So let's rotate on the Z from there. Yep, there we go. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring it around to like right there. That feels pretty good. All right, so now we've got a couple of palm trees. We've got our cactuses. And last thing we want to do is throw in some rocks. Some rocks can give this some feeling of being something more than just you know, a pond in the middle of a desert area. Give it you know, a feeling that it's part of some greater ecosystem. So let's throw a rock like right here. So we're going to Shift A, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a, let's add a round cube. Whoa, that's not what I was expecting. So don't do that. Let's add a, I wonder if that's a new feature of 2.83. The round cubes used to be a circle. It used to be a sphere that was just, its topology was different. I'm sure those settings could have been tweaked to produce a different shape, but let's see. We'll just do a cube, right? And let's hit Ctrl 2, and that's a little too much geography. So what Ctrl does, geometry. What Ctrl 2 does is adds a subdivision modifier with 2 levels of subdivision, and that's probably more than we want. We can go down to 1, and we're actually just going to go ahead and apply this. The subdivision surface modifier is it does exactly what it says it does. It takes all of the faces in the model and subdivides them based on the number provided here. So 1 time here, we can go twice, you can go 3 times, and you continue to do that up to, well, depends on your computer. If you've got a nice computer, you might be able to go fairly high with that, maybe 6, 8, 10. I don't know how deep you can go, but I wouldn't push it. All right, so we have this, and what I want to do is isolate this. So again, we're going to hit the slash on the number pad. All right, and so that's now isolated. We're going to go to edit mode. And what we're going to do over here under the modifier, actually, you know what we're going to do is we're going to apply this modifier, because frankly we don't need it. But another option we could do, because right now what you're seeing is the actual geometry in orange, and then the modified geometry in gray. And we could click this here, which says on cage, which says, okay, I don't care about the real geometry. I want to care about the modified geometry, and I would like to see that as the real geometry. But we don't really care about either of that, because this is the last thing we're going to use for the subdivision modifier, and we don't need the modifier any longer. So we're going to go ahead and apply it. So now when we go into edit mode, we're definitely looking at the real geometry. And what we're going to use is something called the Bisect tool. And if it's under the knife tool here, if you hold that, you get the Bisect tool, and it's a really handy tool. So the way I use it is I'll hit A to select everything, and then you click in kind of empty space and drag, and that bisects our model. Now what that does for you to understand is it's actually cutting the model, and we can decide what happens afterwards. We can clear inner, which clears the inner side, and I'm not sure what defines what's on the inner or the outer. Sometimes I have to play with that. Or you can clear the outer, and it clears the other side. And that leaves, well, it leaves a big hole. But you have another option, is to fill it. And so that clears that off and fills it. All right, and that's exactly what we want here. So we're going to hit A again to use it again, and we're going to cut it this way. And again, we're going to say clear outer, fill, and that does that. And we'll rotate it around a little bit, and we're going to hit A to select all, and let's just cut off a big chunk here. We'll say clear outer, fill. All right, there you go. So our subdivided cube is starting to look a little misshapen, maybe like a rock. All right, so hit A to select all, and let's cut off another chunk here. And again, we'll say clear outer, fill. And I'd say we got something akin to a rock here. So let's go into Vertex mode. And I'm going to select one or two of the, oops, let's go into selection mode. I don't really want to do that. All right. So we're in selection mode now rather than bisect mode because it was trying to cut some things again. And I'm going to select one vert, and I'm going to hit Ctrl-Shift-B, and that's going to bevel that one vertex. And that's going to, basically create a face where that one vertex was. And then I'll grab this and I'll edge slide it. And you edge slide by GG. You hit GG twice, and that lets you grab a vertex and slide it along the edge. And you can hit Alt to go beyond the. So let me show you what I did there. So I hit this vert and I hit GG. And what it's going to let me do is it's going to let me slide it along any of these vertexes, right? Or on these edges rather. But let's say I wanted to slide it directly up. And normally it won't let you do that. It wants to go along one of the verts. If you hold Alt, it lets you go beyond the edge, end of that edge. And so we can say, okay, well, I really want that to be right there, right? Now, what this does is create some weird faces, though. So what you can do is you can select that face, and under Loop Tools, you have the option to flatten a face. And what that does is moves all the verts around so that that face is now flat. But sometimes what it can do is it can alter the other faces around it, which is exactly what that's done. So let's grab this guy and flatten. Let's grab each of these and flatten them, and let's just see what that does to the one in the middle. Select this one, flatten, and select this one, and flatten. Yeah, and see it moved the other one back. So, and that's a product of us moving that vert beyond its limit. So let's hit edge slide that back down, and now our faces are pretty straight over there, but also not uniform, which is what we had before, and that's really what I was trying to get rid of. So this is a pretty good approximation of a rock. So I'm going to hit Tab to go back into object mode and hit that slash again to get us back into to unisolate that rock. So let's go into the camera mode because I really want to lay these out as we understand them to be from the camera's point of view. So I don't have any problem with the way that rock looks right there. So I'm just going to hit Shift D, and I'm going to grab it and I'm going to move it over here, and I'm going to hit Shift Z so that we're only moving it on the X and the Y. I'm going to move it over next to it. I'm going to scale it down, and then I'm going to hit R twice. And what that lets me do is just rotate that, kind of roll it around till I get a look that I like. So that looks good, and I'll move that again. Shift Z, over next to its little friend there. All right. So the great thing about that is we could probably use the same rock. So I'm going to Shift D to duplicate. And then we're going to go Control Z and move it. Nope, that's not right. Shift Z, G, and Shift Z, and move it only in the Z axis. And we're going to move it back here. We're going to scale it down quite a bit. And RR to roll it around. Shift D to duplicate it. Shift Z to move only in the X, or move it in only in X and Y, not in the Z. And we're going to scale this guy down, and again RR to roll it around and get something. All right, and I liked something I did on the previous one as I moved one close to the water, and it kind of created a kind of rock sitting in the water. I liked the effect of that. So let's hit Shift D. Let's grab one more, and we'll hit Shift Z, and we'll move it right here. We're actually going to move this one down so that it's kind of under the water, and yeah, that looks pretty good. All right, the last thing we want to do is we're going to use something, do something similar to what we did with the Thorns, and we'll try to knock this out real quickly. So what we're going to do is we'll just hit Shift A, and we'll create a plane. Shift A, plane, and let's go ahead and get zoomed in on it here. And we're going to rotate this in the X by 90 degrees, and we'll go ahead and tab into Edit, and let's add a couple of edge loops. Good deal. Let's grab this top edge, hit 2 to go into edge mode. I'm going to hit 3 to go into side view, and I'm going to go into up here and turn on proportional editing. And I'm just going to our proportions are way too, our sphere of influence rather is way too large, so I'm going to just drag this over, and maybe I'll rotate it a bit to create that kind of lean of a blade of grass, because that's what we're creating here. All right, and so now let's grab, let's actually isolate this. Let's grab both of these edges and scale them, but we only want to scale them in the X. There we go. We're going to scale it down pretty tight, and then we're going to go ahead, grab this top loop here. We're going to scale it in the X, and let's grow our sphere of influence a little bit so that we're kind of scaling it towards a tapering end there. All right, so there's our blade of grass. Now what we want is more than one blade of grass. So let's select everything. Let's hit 7 to go in top view. I like this view. And since we're in edit mode, we're going to move the geometry just a little. But notice that our origin doesn't move, and that's important. We want our origin to be at the center of all this grass. So we're going to hit Shift D, move this over, rotate it. Oops, why is it oh, I'm going to hit O to turn off proportional editing. I'm going to rotate this guy, grab it, and move it around a little bit. Hit Shift D, let's move it over here. Let's rotate this one. Again, we're grabbing it, and we're trying to kind of, let's see. Yep. What did I do there? I think I extruded. Yeah, there we go. All right, so Shift D and rotate. And we'll do one more. Shift D and rotate. And as you can see, we've created this kind of tuft of grass. And at scale, when we're zoomed out for our camera view, you'll hardly be able to tell, and hopefully won't be able to tell that there's some overlap there. All right, so that's our grass object, and let's go over here and let's name it so that we can find it later, because it's going to be a little difficult. And this is again an object that we're going to move into our booleans and brushes collection. All right, so let's unisolate, and let's just move it down in the Z so that it's move it down in the Z so that it's hidden, because we don't want to see that particular blade of grass. What we want to do is go to our land here, and something we did early on that's actually going to pay off now, and I actually didn't plan this, is that we're going to use that vertex group that we created at the very beginning to represent this top area. We're going to take that vertex group and use it to do weight painting for our grass. So I'll show you how that works. So we created our grass object. So what we want to do is, now that we have this selected, let's make sure we select the right thing. Let's go over here to this particle system and hit plus, and we're going to name it grass. And I don't know why it doesn't rename both of those. There's probably a good reason, but we'll rename it in both places. This is going to be a hair emitter, right? And if we go to advanced, we can do a number of different things. And we did most of this stuff earlier, and we'll kind of breeze through this. But one of the things we want to do is go down here to Vertex Groups, and under density, we want to say top, right? And what that's doing is that's saying we're only concerned with growing grass out of the vertex group that we defined at the very beginning. And that's why we see it only on the top now. If we clear that, you can see it's growing out of the side faces as well. And if we select top, it stops doing that, which is great. But it's also growing out of everywhere, and that's not really what we want. Additionally, we want to do render as object, and we want to select our, let's expand that. We want to take this little pipette here and select grass. And now we're growing grass everywhere, which is great, but still not what we're looking for, right? So let's crank up our scale randomness a little bit, and then crank up our scale in general. And again, we're growing tons of grass, but probably more and in more places than we want. So what do we do? Well, here's how we do that. So with this selected, we go up here to weight paint mode, and you can see that the weight paint system has selected all of the vertexes in our vertex group and marked them as places to grow grass, and everything that's red is a place to grow grass. We have our draw brush selected, so if we draw, we're actually adding, which is not what we want to do. So I'm going to hit Ctrl Z. What we want to do is subtract, which I believe is Control. Maybe it's Shift. Maybe it's neither of those things. Maybe we just change our brush type to subtract. That's probably easier. And doing that, we're actually deselecting vertex, or we're painting away these vertexes from the group, from the weight that we're using for density. And so, you know, we're effectively saying we don't want grass to grow in these places. And so let's go ahead and do that all around the outside. In fact, let's hit F to grow our brush, and Shift F to, well, we're already at 100%. So we're painting a full weight, and we're just unpainting all of this. And let's hit 7 to go in from the top to give us a little bit more visibility. Because that depth is kind of misleading into where you're painting when you're painting from the side. So again, just get rid of all of this around the lake, or the lake's probably a little bit of a strong word. Call it a puddle. We'll unpaint all around the puddle. And we also don't want grass growing in the puddle, right? So we want to unpaint a good portion of that center area, right? So, oops, that's probably what I wanted to do. And be sure to use, you know, this is kind of a strokes. I was actually clicking and holding and dragging all over the place, and that was considered one brush stroke. So when I undid it, it undid everything. So see there, you can see there, I did it again to some degree. All right, so again, still have some vertexes out here that have some things going on, and what we're going to do here is we're actually going to crank down the intensity of this grass anyway, but for the moment we've got our grass. Now what I'm noticing is that our grass is growing kind of halfway out of the ground, which makes me wonder if our object, so let's go back into object mode. Let's select our grass and see, and as you can see it, we did it again. Our origin point is in the middle of the object that is our brush object. So let's hit Tab to go into edit mode. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just select all of these bottom edges. And that's going to allow us to basically get to the center of that geometry. So hit Shift S, cursor to selected, and then tab into object mode, go up here to object, say set origin to 3D cursor. And now our object origin is at the bottom. So that's kind of what we want there. And you can see our grass is now taller because it's growing. If we hit Alt Z to go into X-ray mode, you can see it's growing right out of the ground, which is what we want. All right, so our grass is a little intense, probably more so than we want. So let's go back over here to our particle system, and let's do a couple of different things. First, let's crank down the height, the hair length here a little bit, and let's set our grass rotation. Let's turn on rotation, but we're not going to say velocity hair for our orientation. Actually, we're just going to say global Z, because we want our grass to grow straight up. In this particular case, these are like reeds, and they're growing pretty much straight up. We can add a little bit of randomization, but not a ton. We don't want a lot. All right, so in terms of our sources, we probably want a lot less. So let's crank this down to like 50. Let's see. All right, that's too low. Let's go to 200. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Our size is still a little uniform. We don't really want it to be that uniform. So if we go to scale, why am I not seeing it? It was here a moment ago. All right, here we go. So we can crank up the scale randomness some more. And then if we don't like the height there, we can scale it a little bit more. And you know what I'm finding is that the grass is a little wide. Like it should be thinner. So what we're going to do, and this is a great thing about using a brush, is we can select the brush, we can select everything, and then we can say Shift S or scale, and we don't want to scale in the Z, so we're going to say Shift Z, and we can just scale the whole thing down and kind of give it a little bit of a thinner look. All right, and now we can see that our grass is thinner, right? And because it's thinner, we can have more of them because it doesn't feel like it's as thick of a growth now. So let's kick this up to 350 and see if what that gets us. All right, so we have a decent amount of grass. I want to do a little bit of jitter in terms of the faces. Let's turn this to Verts. Okay, Verts isn't what we want. Volume, okay, that's not terrible. I don't hate that. It's a little weird looking. Like some of these things are still growing very low in the ground. Wonder what that is. Let's see, our rotation, we don't want to randomize that anymore than we did. Phase, we can do phase. We'll rotate the phase a little bit. So this is randomizing the Z-axis rotation, which is good. It gives it a little bit more of a organic look. All right, and tell you what, just to solve this problem, let's just scale these up a little bit. And that gives us, the look we're going for. All right, so I think we're pretty much done with the geometry. So let's crank out the materials, because the materials in this are pretty straightforward and pretty easy. So let's go ahead and do that. So for starters, I'd like to go ahead and let's jump into camera mode. I like to do a lot of the texturing in camera mode so we can kind of see it as it happens. Let's switch over to Viewport Shading. And we're going to drop down this guy here and turn on Scene Lights and Scene World. And right away, you can see that we got pretty dark. So let's think about what we want here. Well, one of the things we want is kind of a moon reflection in the world. So in order to create that, I want to go ahead and add a spotlight. So let's hit Shift A, go down to Lights and Spot, and oh, you can see it added it over here, and that's not really what we wanted. So let's hit Ctrl Z and let's hit Shift S, Cursor to World Origin. Now let's hit Shift A, Light, Spot, and we'll hit G and move it up in the Z. And you can see there briefly we had some light. This is very dim. The lights, when you first create them in Blender, are very dim. You always have to crank them up. But there's some things that we want to play with here. So we're going to move this up so that it's out of scene. We don't want it in scene. And we also want to go here to the Light tab, and we want to crank the angle down on this. We want this to be kind of a bright light in the distance, kind of focused light coming towards the camera. What we're really looking for is for it to reflect off of the water. So in order to create that effect, we're going to have to go to the front view, and let's change the rotation angle to 3D cursor, and we're going to rotate this on the y-axis for 45 degrees negative. And then if we hit 7 to go to the top, whoops, all right, let's try that again. Rotate negative 45, rotated that on the Y, negative 45. I didn't commit that rotation, there we go. Now if we hit 7 to go to the top, we can rotate it on the Z, 45, negative, and that puts it directly opposite the camera. And if we crank up the power to say, let's say 500, you can see that it's pretty bright, but it's also creating a spot that we really don't want. So let's actually crank up the size until it's covering our entire space, and we'll see what that looks like. Now, moonlight I always think about as having a blue tint to it, so we're gonna just give it a slight blue tint, and I like blue trending towards green versus blue trending towards purple for moonlight. So that feels pretty good. So let's just leave that there for a moment. And you know what I've noticed we haven't done is we haven't added a plane for our ground, our background plane. So let's hit Shift A, Mesh Plane, and let's scale that. Let's say 20. Yeah, I think that's big enough. All right, so this is our ground plane. And what I like to do is I like to have it just a hair below the bottom of our our ground object. So, and what that creates is an interesting shadow. that I really like to do. So, all right, so that looks good for right now. So let's also add for now, let's add a area light, and let's move it up in the Z. We're going to move it out of frame again, and we're just going to scale it up. Oops, it's scaling on our 3D cursor, which we don't want. So let's say median point, and let's scale it. Let's move it up in the Z a little bit more, and let's give it like 150 power. Yeah, that's okay. We'll play around with that. Let's move it up in the Z a little bit further, and let's give it a little bit of a blue axis as well. Actually, let's give it a little bit of a green. All right, so we've got something to work with on lighting. Definitely not done, but something to work with. So let's go ahead and start throwing some textures on things. So let's grab our materials rather. So let's grab our ground, and let's just create a sand texture. And sand is, you know, kind of a beigey color, right? Maybe it's a little darker than that. And our specularity of sand is going to be kind of middle of the road, but maybe a little lower than middle. And then I like to crank up the roughness so that it kind of eats up some of the light a little bit. So let's go with that. Let's just see what that looks like for now. Now, our green area light is providing some green highlights that maybe I don't love. So let's go up to our green area light. Let's just make it white for now. We can play with that after we get some real colors in here. So if we go and we select our grass object that we created earlier, we can throw a material on that. We'll call it grass, and we'll go with a green color. We'll darken it up a bit. And the specularity on grass is going to be kind of high. It's a little shiny, or it can be anyway. We'll crank the roughness down just a hair. Okay. All right, and our rocks, we'll go and throw a rock texture on. And I'm going to go where we went with the previous one, kind of a brownish color. Low specularity, high roughness, and it's a little darker than I wanted. Let's come over here. All right, so now we've got a bunch of rocks in our scene, so we can actually select those rocks. Let's see if I can actually select it. Didn't want that. Didn't want that. Okay, well, we're going to do this the hard way. We can select all of the rocks, and then select the last rock that we've already applied the texture to. We select it last, and if we do that, we can hit Ctrl L, and this we can make links, and there's all sorts of data we can transfer via link, but we're concerned with the materials. So we're going to hit materials, and that transfers the materials from our highlighted object, our selected active object, to every other object that's selected. So that did that. And so we'll do the same thing with our palm trees. We'll give it a base bark texture, and go with something in the brownish, but light brownish kind of area. A very high roughness, low specularity, right? And now we have more than just bark here, right? So we've got some leaves. So let's grab all the faces of the leaves. We're just going to give them our grass texture. So let's hit plus for our material and select grass and assign, and that assigns our grass to there. And just like we did with the other one, we can select this tree and then select this other tree, hit Ctrl L, and transfer our materials over. And that did not work. Why didn't that work? Ctrl L, materials. How about Ctrl L, object data? Nope. Oh, we need to select the one with the material last. I went backwards. How about the Ctrl L, materials? There we go. Now it's transferred over, although it didn't transfer everything. So let's hit the same thing. Let's do Ctrl L, object data. And that, for some reason, that is necessary if you have more than one material on your object. There may be some side effects of that we don't anticipate, but with this being such a simple object, it's probably okay. Now we have our thorn down here, and I think I want our thorns to be a different color than the rest of our cactus. So let's say thorn. How about thorn? Oh my gosh. There we go. Thorn. And let's go with something kind of light greenish. Alright, and you can see that our cactus thorns now have a little bit of color. And let's make them, let's leave them fairly the kind of middle of the road specularity, and just drop their roughness just a bit. Alright, now let's select our actual cactus. Let's add a material there. Cactus. And we're going to make these a deeper green than we did for our... yeah, I like that. I don't think I even want to change anything. So let's select this guy, shift select this guy, Ctrl L, materials. Alright, now our cactuses have their material. So our ground doesn't have a material, so or our background, so let's add one there. Let's call it just BG. And we'll go with something kind of bluish, maybe trending towards green. Yeah. And let's crank up the roughness a little bit, and specularity crank down a hair, and that feels good. Alright, so the water, that's the last thing we want to do. Now the water's interesting. We've got we could just make it blue, right? So we could just go in here and say water, and we could say, oh well, you know, it's blue water, right? We can crank up the specularity really high and roughness down low, and it gets a nice reflection. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't hate that. And if we go down to, and this is one of the things I like to do earlier, is I like to go and switch over to the cycles render engine. And we'll say supported GPU compute, and then now we can switch over to the rendered view, and we can actually see what some of this lighting is going to do. And already I can see that it's brighter than I want it to be. So let's go over to the world properties, and let's just crank down the strength of the world background. I'm going to go all the way down to 0. And this means that no light is being added to the scene that isn't one of our lights that we created, which is kind of what I like. Sometimes I'll work with world lights, but more often than not, I don't like the effect that it gets. I like to control all the light. Now the water, we can play with it a little bit, right? So why don't we do this? Let's go to our spotlight and let's hide it. And so now the only light we have to work with is our area light, and then we can hide it as well. And guess what? It's dark. Now if we select our water and we go down to our texture, we can do some interesting things, but we can't do it here. What we need to do is we need to go over to the shading tab. The shading tab gives us, let's jump back into our rendered view. The shading tab gives us the node editor, which is where some cool magic can happen. So let's do something interesting. We've got our principled BSDF shader here, which is kind of giving us our color. And I like where it's at in terms of, you know, the settings we have. But what I'd like to do is add something else to this shade, to this material. So we're going to add a emissive shader. Let's try an emission shader. We'll just add that, and then let's add a shader, a mix shader. All right, and we're going to drop that right on the line, and then we'll pull this emission into our other thing. And now what we've got is, you know, it's something else, something interesting. So we can crank the emission strength down. All right, we can change this principled shader. We can delete that by hitting X, and we can hit Shift Add, and we can change the shader to maybe a principled volume shader. And let's see what we can do with that. So let's give it some color, and let's crank down the density. It's not really having all that interesting of an effect. Play with different things here. You know, I think what the problem might be is that we're working with a plane that has no actual volume, right? So let's give it some volume. Let's grab this. Let's go tab into edit mode, and what we're going to do is we're going to maybe go into edge mode. Definitely in edge mode. We're in edit mode, but I can't seem to select anything. So let's go into layout. Not sure what's going on there. Alright. Not sure what we're working with here, but things have definitely gone sideways. Where did everything go? Alright, there we go. Alright, so let's grab our water. We're in object mode. Let's isolate it. Hit tab to go into edit mode. There we go. Not sure what was going on there. What I'm going to do is just control click all around the edges. And what that does is just takes the shortest edge path from the currently selected to whatever you click on. Alright. And then we're going to extrude in the Z. And then when we get down, we'll just hit F to fill that in. And that should take care of that. So now we have some volume. So let's hit tab again and let's jump over to our. Alright, so we're getting a similar effect that we had before. Let's go to our shading view. There we go. Again, jump back over here. And let's see if we can't figure out what we can play with here. So this volume shader is not producing what I thought it would. So let's actually get rid of that. Let's go back to the principled BSDF shader, wherever that is. Here we go. All right, let's plug that guy in. But let's do something. Let's like turn up the. Well, let's go back to our base color, kind of a bluish color. Not getting the effect here. Let's turn up the transmission. Nope, still nothing. Interesting. Alright, well let's at least crank up the specularity, and the roughness goes way down. Let me check. The IOR of water I think is like 1.33 or 1.35, something like that. And transmission will crank up pretty high. Maybe let's get rid of the mix shader, and instead of pulling that into a mix, let's actually pull the emission into the volume. Ooh, look at that. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. So let's play with different values here. So again, let's say 1.35 for the IOR. Let's go with something more blue. Ooh, look at that. Now that's creating some interesting effects. It's a little bright though. Let's crank the strength down here to like, ooh, okay. I don't hate that. All right, so yeah, I dig that. So right on. Well, let's play a little bit with some more lighting. I think we're done with this this material. If you can see, what I did here is I just pulled in the normal principled BSDF, which is always plugged in by default to the surface node on your output. But then we took the emission and drug it into the volume, and that just created this really cool effect. Kind of really made that water glow, almost like it's radioactive or something. And you could play with different things. You can monkey with the color. So like making it a little bit more green in its emission really made that blue a little deeper, which is pretty cool looking. Alright, so let's jump back over to layout. And we lost some of that. Why did we lose? Why did we lose that glow? That was weird. Alright, so let's make this 1. Maybe 2. So it was really popping. There we go. So that looks good. Let me jump over to layout. Okay, it's back. That was weird. I wonder if that was... Maybe I hit something. Or maybe it's a weird bug. I don't know. This is a new version of Blender, so wouldn't be the first time. Alright, so let's wrap this up. So we want to add a couple more lights. I like to have some lights coming in from the side, or sometimes if I've got a lot of geometry to work with, I like to put lights behind things to kind of create a backscatter or kind of a backlight. But we don't really have a lot of geometry in the Z-axis to work with here, so I think what we'll do is we'll hit Shift-A. We'll add a area light. We'll move that up in the Z. Go ahead and move it out of scene. We'll scale it up a bit. We'll rotate it on the X by, let's say, nope, sorry. We want to first change our back to 3D cursor. Rotate on the X by, say, 75 degrees. And then we'll rotate it on the Z. That is doing something weird. Rotate on the Z. Oh, there we go. That's what we're looking for. And I'll just come in from over here, maybe like right here. And I'm going to hit G, Z, Z and move it back a little bit further. So I think it's going to be a little powerful right up against this. Let's make this like 75. Alright, yeah, so we got some interesting color here, but we want it more muted because we don't want, so let's make this more like 50. And let's change the color to something interesting, like maybe a red. Something trending towards red and orange. Yeah, there we go. And we'll hit Shift D, and let's just rotate that on the Z by 180 degrees. And it's actually a little further than we want it, so let's hit R, Z, and let's move it around to like right here. And I'm just going to go up top and make sure that looks good. Yep, I like it. All right, but we want the color for this one to be something different. So let's look for something complementary, like up here in the blue-green area. All right, so let's take a look at that. Let's just zoom in, and why don't we render this and see what it looks like. I think we might want to remove that light that's from above, the area light from directly above. And we're also going to tweak some settings. That turned out really great. It's pretty solid. I don't hate that at all. All right, so let's close this because what we want to do is we want to do a couple of things. Let's see if we can just hide that light from above and turn that spotlight back on. Let's see what kind of effect that creates. All right, so the spotlight is a little harsh. So let's go here and select the spotlight, go into light mode. And there's two sizes. There's the spot shape size, which changes this. And I actually want to crank that down just a hair so that it doesn't exceed the edges of our little our world here. But then there's this size here, which actually determines the hardness of the shadows, right? And we don't want them to be really hard, so we're going to zoom this out a little bit, or change this size to something higher, so it kind of softens these shadows that it's creating. All right, I like that, but what we're losing here is, and if we let's go ahead and tweak our render settings while we're thinking about it. Let's go to performance, and I've not done any research on this beyond reading and watching videos of other people, but 256 feels like the right number. You may find something separate, something different for your computer depending on how powerful your GPU is and CPU, etc. But 256 in the X and the Y for your tile size feels like a pretty good number. There's a new feature with Blender 2.83. I think it's new. It certainly seems new to me, is this adaptive sampling. And what that does is lets Blender decide how noisy an area is, how noisy the tile is. And as a result, it only renders until it's no longer producing a less noisy image. And then it moves on. So if that's 20 samples or 200 samples, as long as it's under your max samples, it stops whenever it reaches that kind of point of diminishing return. So we're going to turn that on, and what that's going to let us do is crank up the actual render to like 256 easily. Will render as fast, if not faster, than what we just did. So let's hit F12. I want to show you that we're losing the detail, I think, in our leaves by removing that light from above. But no, I still. Oh, you know why? I know why. We're not losing the detail. The details there because, and let's close that, because when I changed the lights, when I hid the lights, I only hid them in the visibility. So these three filters we have visible in viewport, and then visible in render. We want all three of those turned off. And then let's go ahead and turn off these three here, and let's move these area lights to collection. Let's see what that looks like. Let's hit F12. Take a look. Yeah, and as you can see, we lost a great deal of detail from our palm tree leaves, which we didn't want to lose that much detail. So what I'm going to do, yeah, I think everything else looks pretty good though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that area light that we hid, I'm going to turn it back on, but I'm going to crank it way down because I really only want it to hit those leaves a little bit just to create some detail there. So let's try 50. It's probably still too high. Let's try 25. That feels good. Let's hit F12 for render. Let's see what we get. All right, yeah, so we got that detail back, but we still preserved the kind of nighttime feel that we've created with the darkness behind the scene, as well as the kind of glow of the waters not being washed out. So I like that quite a lot, and I think our cactuses turned out pretty great. This is a good place to be. So I think I'm gonna leave it at that. I think this has shown you exactly how at least how my thought process went creating this piece. I know this went long, and I appreciate it if you're still around for sticking around. I really do appreciate it. I'm trying to grow this channel, and every view counts, and every comment counts, and every moment that you guys spend here, watching what I'm doing is really great support for me. So I'll be working on doing more of these and getting them to be more efficient and fast. This is the first one I've done, so they hopefully will get better. But thank you for sticking around. And if you like what you see, click that subscribe button, ring the bell, all that stuff. Click the like button, whatever it is you do on YouTube. I'm new here, so if you can do those things, it really helps support the channel. And hopefully you learned something. And I'll be back with another video soon. Thanks a lot.